Hi there, Duke fans. Episode 653 of the DBR podcast, the Duke Basketball Roundup. Jason Evans here for your listening enjoyment. I am joined by my buddy Donald Wine. Donald, how you doing today?
Doing pretty good. Over the last day or two, we've gotten a lot of polls. From many different people, polls, rankings, whatever you want to call them. We're going to discuss them and compare them all in this episode.
Exactly. By the way, I want to come right out and say I had hoped, I was talking to Carlos Boozer. I'd hoped that Carlos was going to get me his two sons and maybe him to appear on this podcast today. He's gone a little radio silent. We chatted a little bit on Friday last week, and then I haven't heard much from him over the weekend. Still trying, still hoping that's going to happen. It's also possible that the Boozer boys have been told by Duke Sports Information that, hey, you don't be doing lots of interviews and stuff. Now that you're officially here, let's clam it up and let Duke Sports Information handle your media appearances. I don't really know the reason, but I just wanted to apologize if I kind of teased that we would maybe have them. Carlos was saying yeah, we'll make it work out, and then suddenly not as much. Oh well,
it happens. It's that's why they call it show business, right? Sometimes you feel like you're very close, and then things happen, whether it's schedules, whether it's other entities. It's all good. Hopefully one day we'll have them on. It doesn't have to be on this show. Maybe it's the next show. We'll just keep teasing until maybe they come on. It might take a couple years, but we'll keep doing it. We'll keep trying.
Exactly. All right, Donald, we're going to start with the AP poll that came out just yesterday. We're going to just so folks know, you mentioned polls, two big ones. We have the AP poll and Ken Pomeroy's rankings as well. Both came out in like the past 24 hours or so. Duke comes in at number 7 on the AP poll. Kansas and Alabama at the top there. I don't know that this is at all controversial that Duke is number 7. You can make an argument that they should be higher. The folks who do the advanced metrics, like Ken Pomeroy, and we'll get to that in a little bit, they say that Duke should be higher. They say Duke should really be in the top 2, top 3. But look, this is where we saw throughout the preseason all the people who just put out their, ESPN, CBS, all these other folks, individuals who put out their own rankings have pretty consistently had Duke between like 6 and 9, 6 and 8. I've seen us. I haven't really seen anybody put us outside the top 10, but it's pretty rare to find someone who puts us in the top 5. So I'm not surprised. There's a lot of herding, by the way, that happens in these things. I think it'd be really, really interesting, Donald, if all the AP voters were forced to sign something, that said, I will not look at anyone else's preseason rankings and then put together a preseason poll, because my bet is they all read, Dickie V and all the other folks, all the other experts who are out there, John Rothstein, Seth Davis, you name it. Everybody and their brother has a preseason ranking they put out there. And I think that the AP voters just kind of go, oh yeah, all these guys, they're saying this is what it is. And so this is what it will be.
I disagree slightly. The reason why is because you have to formulate some sort of opinion without having seen any of these teams play. And you're right. Not everybody is a John Rothstein who's going to travel around the country and see a billion teams to kind of formulate an educated opinion. A lot of these guys are beat writers following a local team, whether it's Duke, whether it's NC State, whether it's Syracuse, whoever. And so you see in this poll, the very first poll of the year is usually reflected by what they have seen and really what they haven't, and what they're just going off of research. And you'll see some teams at the bottom where you're like, oh, that team got a vote. Why? It's because that beat writer has seen them play and they're like, yeah, they might be a top 25 team, and they'll vote for them. So I'm not necessarily concerned about that. But what we have seen is, so far, as you mentioned, the polls reflect what a lot of people are saying, is that they really just don't know what to expect with this Duke team, despite the fact they have a lot of players that individually people are heralding as some of the best players in college basketball, like a Cooper Flagg, like a Man, right? So I think when you look at the number 7 ranking, I think is right around where we thought it would be. I think what was interesting is that there wasn't anybody who aimed for the stars, right? There wasn't anybody who was really saying, no, you know what? I think all the voters are wrong. Duke is one of the top teams in this country. If you look at the number of first place votes that people got,
right,
Duke did not get one. And I think a lot of people, Kansas got the bulk of them, which is why they're number 1. But I was curious to see if there was someone out there who was going to say, "No, I think you guys are tripping. Like Duke is that real deal. Cooper's that real deal, and with these guys combined, they are the best team in this country." And nobody did that. Which, okay, that's fine. Put that on the bulletin board next to everyone thinking that we're not going to win this year, and you can file that away. But I will say, when you look up and down this top 25, the thing that stands out, first of all, is that the ACC was not well represented. Duke is number 7,
Yeah.
UNC is number 9, and then that's it. You have a lot of them in the receiving votes. Wake Forest got 37, Miami got 11, Clemson got 9, and Louisville got 4. That tells me that there's at least some writers out there who think that the ACC is a little stronger than that people would think. But having
Yeah.
only two in the top 25 is really, really not what I thought we were going to see.
Yeah, and to put a finer point on those vote totals, how they sort of equate to, where you are in the rankings, because even though there are only 25 teams in the top 25, I guess there could be a tie, there could be 26, but there are 25 teams in the top 25. But if you look at the vote totals, you can create rankings all the way down to number 55, because there are 55 different teams that got votes. And you mentioned, Wake Forest, the number of votes they got make them the number 30 team. Miami's number 38. Louisville is 47. Clemson is 41. So, those ACC teams, those are seen as teams that have a pretty decent shot at reaching the NCAA tournament. If you're in the top 45, maybe top 50, you're in a pretty good spot generally to make the NCAA tournament. So, yeah, I mean, ACC isn't seen as super strong at the top, but there's got some heft there in the middle. I want to get back to something else you mentioned, which is, the fact that people, no one picked this Duke team number 1. I think it is abundantly clear, based on what we've seen the past few years of college basketball, especially with the 5th year of eligibility being granted to all the COVID folks, and this year being the last year for that, that everyone's looking for the most experienced teams. They're looking at teams who did really well in the transfer portal, added to their roster in that kind of way. And no one's really interested in freshmen. Don, I got a question for you. So Duke is projected to start 3 freshmen this year. Virtually everyone says Cooper Flagg, Kaman Malawach, and Kon Knippel are all going to be starting for Duke this year, at least initially. That's what I saw in practice. That's what we've gotten hints of. That's what everyone is sort of saying at this point. Do you know how many other top 25 teams are starting 3 freshmen, Donald?
None.
The answer is 0. How many top 25 teams do you think are projected to start even 2 freshmen?
None.
Rutgers, the number 25
Oh, yeah, Rutgers.
team.
Yeah. Ace Bailey and Harper. Yeah, that sounds
Ace
about right.
Bailey and Dylan Harper. And actually, I should add, it's possible UNC starts 2 freshmen, Ian Jackson and Drake Powell, though it looks like probably only one of them is going to start. But you want to tell me that maybe both those want to tell me that I think those 2 guys are 2 of the 5 best players on the Carolina team this year. But regardless, it looks like only one of them is going to start. So, like, how many teams do you think in the top 25 are starting even 1 freshman?
Well, it's at least 2.
Right. There's Duke and Rutgers, UNC,
UNC.
and UConn, Baylor, and Texas. Those are the only other teams projected to start even 1 freshman. Duke's lineup, by the way, is going to be 3 freshmen, a sophomore, and a junior. And it's worth noting that junior is actually sophomore age, because Tyrese Proctor came to school a year
and
early.
The sophomore is actually freshman age, and the freshman is really
high school
senior age. We had a couple of guys who reclassified in this lineup.
Both Cooper and Kaman Malawach is also young for a freshman. I mean, like, this is, we talk about, Duke brought in 2 super seniors in Mason Gillis and Sion James. We brought in Malik Brown, who's a very, very, very experienced player as a junior. But let's be realistic. Compared to the rest of the teams in the top 25, Duke is just not that experienced. They're not that old. They're super young, in fact. And what's more, there's this issue of transfers, because everyone else is building through the transfer portal. Again, yes, Duke brought in 3 transfers, but none of them are projected to start for this team. There are only 2 other teams in the top 25, Purdue and Marquette. Duke, Purdue, and Marquette are the only teams in the top 25 who probably aren't going to be starting a single transfer. Everyone else, 1, 2, sometimes 3 or 4 transfers they're going to be starting. So if you're wondering, like, how can people look at this Duke lineup How can they look at this Duke roster that appears to have like 6 or 7 at least guys who are going to play in the NBA someday? How can you, Duke's projected right now to have 3 lottery picks. How can you look at this Duke roster and say that's the number 7 team? We are super young and not that experienced as a result of being young, and we're not building our team the way most other teams are building their team. I'm not saying our approach is wrong. In fact, I think it's very, very right, and I just think it's the excellence of our youngsters that means that our transfers and our super seniors are not starting. But we're different, and different doesn't tend to get you the number 1 ranking.
I'll go back to the freshmen in a second, but let me touch on the upperclassmen. The one thing is the read on Duke in this offseason that despite they're bringing in a freshman class that is heralded and has a lot of guys, we have gotten older, we have gotten more physical, we have gotten faster,
I
we've
agree.
gotten stronger, right? That has been the read on Duke all summer long. That's not reflected in here because they're not starting. And I think the one thing is they emphasize people who are starting because in most places, the people who are starting are all getting 25 to 30 minutes a game, and the rest of the guys are picking up whatever minutes are left over. I don't think that's going to be the case this year. You and I have talked about, how this is going to work. Of course, we'll see the first look on Saturday, and we'll talk about that later in the week. But we've seen how these combinations can be. Yeah, you can have a guy who starts the game and plays 12 minutes because the super 6 man is coming off the bench and playing 30. You never know how this is going to work. And of course, this is all speculation here because a lot of these people have not seen a lot of these players. I also think going back to the freshmen, you mentioned Rutgers having 2 freshmen, Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper. Jason, remind me, where did they finish in the ESPN 100? They were number 2 and number 3 in the country.
I know.
Back a year ago, being number 2 or number 3 in the country on the same team would be enough to get you in the top 10 based on that alone. That has gotten Rutgers all the way to 25th. So that tells you that they're just not looking at freshmen in the same way as being a lift to a team in a sports landscape where upperclassmen have been what have driven most of these teams to success recently.
And Donald, this is supposed to be an excellent freshman class. This is not
right.
There's some years where
this was like one of the best ever. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of people who will tell you that Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper, who are number 2 and number 3, would be number 1 in like half the classes that we've had over the past decade. But if we're not for the generational talent that is Cooper Flagg. Hey, you got anything else on the AP rankings, or should we move over to Ken Pom?
I will say real quickly, we're going to talk about these teams obviously in Ken Pom as well. But we have to look at the non-conference schedule, and we keep reiterating we have a beast of a non-conference schedule. We face number 1 Kansas. We face number 9 UNC. Of course, that's in conference. Arizona's number 10.
We face them twice.
Yeah, we face UNC twice. Arizona we face on the road. Auburn in the ACC SEC Challenge. Thankfully,
say the numbers. Arizona's number 10.
I said number 11.
Auburn's
I said number 11.
Yeah.
Arizona's 10. Auburn's 11. UNC's 9. That's again, we faced twice. And then Kentucky's 23. And honestly, I don't think Kentucky's number 23. I think they should be a little bit higher. But again, a lot of freshmen coming in, a lot of turnover, a new coach. I mean, basically entire lineup, the entire roster changed over for them. So they're not being, heralded as much, but we have to take that game seriously when they come see you, Jason, in Atlanta. So again, we're going to talk about some of these teams when it reflects with the Ken Pom poll. But I do think it's interesting that we have, some guys in the top 10 that we're seeing, top 11 that we're seeing very early on in the season, a good way to test. And just outside of the top 25 is Illinois, who we will face in February at Madison Square Garden. So, when it comes to the teams that we've said are going to be the big games that we play, that is reflected for the most part in these standings.
Man, I thought I was going to get you on Illinois. I was going to say, hey, you left out Illinois. They're number 26, but you had it all in there, man. All right, so let's take a quick turn and go from the human polls to the computer one. Although, I don't know, is Ken Pom's initial poll human or computer?
Yes, it is. Yes,
it is a healthy dose of both of those because Ken Pomeroy obviously does not have any actual data from this season yet to begin building his model, but he did build it off of data from past seasons and from expectations of players and all that other kind of stuff. He finds that the Duke Blue Devils are number 2, the number 2 team in the country behind number 1 Houston. It is worth noting Duke is well behind Houston. Pomeroy's computer loves the Houston Cougars. All they lose is Jamal Shed, a hell of a player. but they bring back basically everything else. They added a couple more pieces as well. There's a good reason that the computers that loved Houston a year ago still love them today. And it's worth noting that Duke is just slightly at number two, just slightly ahead of Auburn, who is number three. And as we've mentioned earlier, we play Auburn
Mhm.
on December 4th. It's going to be a tough schedule for the Blue Devils. Donald, the thing that I thought was really interesting about the Ken Pomeroy rankings was he's projecting everybody's offense and defense. He projects Duke to have the number 7 offense and the number 3 defense. The only defenses he likes better than Duke coming into the season are Houston and Iowa State. And those are two teams. Last year, Iowa State was number 1 and Houston was number 2 in defense. So not surprising that he would put those two teams at the top of his defensive rankings this year. But Duke last year was number 16 on defense, and he has elevated us all the way up to number 3, which I think is really, really interesting. You and I have been talking about it for a while. The guys that Duke has brought in are all considered defensive specialists in terms of transfers. The freshmen that Duke has brought in, at least in terms of Common Malawach and Cooper Flagg, are considered to be elite defenders. I mean, this is the two guys that Duke brings back, not to knock Mark Mitchell or Jeremy Roach or Sean Stewart or TJ Power or any of the guys who transferred. None of them were really known as great. Mark Mitchell, maybe to some extent, were known as good defenders, but Tyrese Proctor, especially, and to a lesser extent, Caleb Foster, the guys who return, are known as pretty darn good defenders, if not great defenders. And Ken Pomeroy is clearly buying into this with the Blue Devils, giving us what he expects to be the number 3 defense in the land. By the way, thing I love about being good on defense travels. Defense
Yep.
goes no matter where you go. Defense always shows up. You can have an off shooting night. You can have one of those days where you just can't throw the ball in the ocean. Your defense, if it's good, is always good.
Defense is something that you can place in your bag and the seat underneath you when you're on your plane going anywhere in the country to face any of these teams. And Jason, we look at the 25, at least the top 25 for Ken Palm's rankings, and they're slightly different, right? Again, some of these teams like Kansas, of course, number 1 in the AP poll, they're number 6 here in Ken Palm. So that's not a big change, but at least some of these things are switching around. You have in the top 25 for Ken Palm, Clemson at number 24, which again, he really likes Clemson. And I think, Jason, the one thing about this is keep in mind that the things that kind of the writers are kind of dismissing about Duke, or at least, knocking down Duke for, are things that are kind of elevated in this, right? They're saying, oh, you're not having any starters that are transfers. Well, these transfers numbers are plugged into that computer, and that computer says, oh, these guys are on the team and they're expected to play. Yeah,
Yeah.
like that. So, that sort of thing is going to translate well, and you have a lot more, I guess, credit on the behalf of Duke from the computers for some of these transfers that we did bring in. I will say this as well. You're looking at, again, some of these schedules, right? The teams that we're playing: 3 Auburn, 6 Kansas, 8 Arizona. Again, we play UNC twice. They're number 14. 23 Illinois, again, just outside the top 25, but in Ken Palm, they're a little bit higher in the 23. And then I mentioned Clemson at 24. But when you look down the ACC, it's kind of a wider gap. Yes, there's more teams, but the teams that are, coming in: Pitt's at 38, Wake Forest is at 44, NC State at 52, Miami's at 55, Louisville, who we've talked about should be a lot better this year, is at 64 in these rankings. But again, they had almost an entire team turnover and a new coach. So the computer's going to.
Louisville was in the 200s, the 250s,
Right,
the past couple of
right.
years. So this is a huge step up for them.
Right.
Yeah.
And we go all the way down again. Louisville, you mentioned, was all the way down in the 200s last year. They were really hurting the ACC's rep. The lowest team in this Ken Palm ranking so far is Cal at 135. You have BC at 113. Everyone else is in the top 100. Who do we talk about when we talk about these things? When we preview all these teams, we talk about teams they've played in the top 100 to Ken Palm and how they did against them. The ACC is a lot more improved, even with the addition of 3 teams this year. And of course, if they do well in the non-conference schedule, that is only going to go up, and that is only going to help the ACC.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Pomeroy only has 5 ACC teams in the top 50, which you could really say he's sort of only projecting 5 teams to make the NCAA tournament. But then, yeah, the rest of the conference, other than BC and Cal, is in that second 50. Those are teams that certainly have a chance to rise up. It means that the ACC is full of a lot of teams that are like okay to good, not as many teams that are really good to great. But it is showing some respect at least for the ACC. Last thing I had in the Pomeroy rankings, he projects tempo, which is kind of
Mhm.
a strange thing to project, but I guess sure. He sort of last year Duke played kind of slowly. I think we were like I looked up the number earlier. We were like 265th or something like that in tempo. He projects us to be 278th in tempo this year. Look, I get it. I mean, Caleb Foster and Tyrese Proctor, who are the guys who really drove our tempo a year ago, are back. And you would go, okay, well, I'm sure they'll play at the same speed this year that they did last year. I think he's really wrong. The one Pomeroy projection that I'm going to say is wrong. Duke is not going to be 278th in tempo this year. I will be pretty sure that this team is in the top 100 in tempo. I think John Shire wants to push the pace. We have seen him emphasizing that in practice extensively. Top 100, I think probably even top 50 for sure for this team. Although it's worth noting, when you play really good defense, when you grind people down on defense, which this Duke team probably will, then you might be a team that plays fast on offense, but really slow on defense. And that, of course, can change your tempo a lot. But I just think Duke's going to be a much faster team than we've seen the past couple of years.
It's hard for the computer to project a team that's going to, block a lot of shots, get a lot of steals, and go the other way very quickly. It's just not something that we've done. Yeah, we tend to do it from time to time, but when they slow down into the actual offense, it's about time of possession and how many seconds are we taking to shoot the ball. That's not going to, that's going to be, kind of skewed in the first few weeks by the number of times we steal the ball and go quickly for a dunk the other way. So that'll change. I'm not necessarily concerned about that. I will say this again, going back to our schedule. There are 31 games right now on our calendar. That's not counting the ACC tournament. That's not counting the NCAA tournament. So we can have up to 40 games in this season. Of course, we want to win all 40. That would be great. In the top 70 of our 31 opponents, again, that's teams, even teams we're facing twice. 18 of them are in the top 70. That is a loaded schedule.
Yeah.
I mean, that's counting the ACC, all the teams in the ACC, that's counting our non-conference schedule. We have a loaded schedule, ladies and gentlemen. And I think the thing about it is that we're going to be tested every single time. And that's not counting the teams that are just outside the top 70 that could creep up into the top 70. Just in the ACC alone, SMU is number 74. I did not count them. UVA is 78, which is a precipitous drop from where we've seen them in previous years. And again, all this stuff can change as the season goes along. There's going to be teams that drop out. There's going to be teams that go up. When we look at the net, when we start looking at the Ken Pom top 100 teams that other teams have faced, you want our teams, after we face them, to do well, right? You want that number to go up so that when they look and they go, hey, Duke beat all these teams, you can say all these teams in the top 70, which again, NCAA tournament takes 68. And not all of the top 70 will go to the tournament because of automatic qualifiers. But you want to at least see that you're beating, quote unquote, NCAA tournament caliber teams. That is a top 70. So if we're doing well against that, again, we're going to have at least at this point 18 opportunities to do so, and it could be more. If we keep holding our own against those teams and doing well against them, that'll help with seeding. That'll help with, again, staying close to home when it comes to the NCAA tournament. And that can, ease our road to a national championship. But that's why they play the games. The rankings are one thing. Once we start filling in data with some of our play, all of this is going to change. But really, I think the key things, look at that defensive number. It's always a stat game thing that Sam has for us. And look at the other teams in the ACC and how they kind of shape up. Because the stronger the ACC is, the more that takes into account when they go, oh, it's between, Duke and UConn for the 4th 1 seed. Are they going to go with the Big East? Or are they going to go with the ACC team? You want the ACC to have done well to help Duke out in that class.
Yeah. In the past 5 years, Duke's schedule, overall schedule, and this includes ACC and non-conference games, Duke's schedule has been like solidly in the 40s or 50s every year in Ken Pom over the past 5 years. It's like you can just book us to be like 42, 48, 54, somewhere in that kind of ballpark, which is fine. I mean, that's a good schedule. It's not a great schedule, but it's a good schedule. You have to go back to 2019 to find the last time Duke had a top 10 strength of schedule. And I think we may come close to that this year. Probably not quite that high, just because the ACC isn't quite strong enough. I mean, we're going to be playing catch up with every team in the Big Ten and the Big 12 especially, in terms of, strength of schedule. Even though we have a tough non-conference schedule, the conference schedule just isn't, the ACC just isn't as strong as those conferences, at least at the, looking at it in the preseason. But I think you could see Duke with like a top 20 non-conference schedule, which is befitting of a team that has a lot of high expectations on it. Don, we're going to take a quick break. On the other side, DBR Live. Do you want to join a Zoom with Donald and Jason to talk about a Duke basketball game? It happens this weekend. It happens Saturday. All the details when we come back. Thanks for sticking around. Listen to those commercials, everybody. Now that those are done, we are back in action, Donald. And we're going to start with this. The AP, Ken Pom, those are not the only polls to come out in the past couple of days. We got the women's top 25, and I've talked about this a few times. We don't do as much women's basketball here. We're mostly focused on the men, but the women are going to be very, very good this year, aren't they?
Yes. As I've said before, when the
there we go. Yes, we can move on. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. As we said before, you should pay attention to these Duke women just like we are. And just because we don't talk about it on the show doesn't mean we're not watching these games. But I will say this, these games are going to be spectacular this year. This team is going to be really good. And the writers actually believe us, because Duke in the first poll comes in at number 11. They're just 2 points behind number 10, Oklahoma. So they're really just a team that most consider a top 10-ish team in the country. I'll go through the top 10 very quickly. Number 1, of course, is defending champion South Carolina. Until they lose, they are the number 1 team in the country. You got UConn, USC, Texas, UCLA, Notre Dame, LSU, Iowa State, NC State, and Oklahoma just before Duke, as I mentioned. And I will say this, first of all, Duke has, we talked about the men's schedule, and I've talked a little bit about the teams that Duke women will face this year. I have said before, I will say it again, the ACC women's conference might be the best conference in basketball. There are 6 ranked ACC teams. I mentioned 6 is Notre Dame, 9 is NC State, 11 is Duke. We face UNC twice. They are number 15. Number 17 is Louisville, and number 19 is FSU. But the other teams receiving votes, Stanford, Miami, Georgia Tech, and Syracuse. That is 10 out of the 18 teams that voters at least think are top 25 teams. Now, add to that the non-conference schedule. They are facing number 1 South Carolina in the ACC SEC Challenge that is on the road in South Carolina. So that'll be a huge, huge test for these Blue Devils. But before that, they travel on the road to Maryland, number 18, and then they face Kansas State, who's number 13, in Vegas the day after Duke men take on Kansas in Vegas. So if you're in Vegas, try to stick around for that other game, because that's part of a multi-team event early season tournament that they're doing. But I will say this, 18 game ACC schedule. They face every team once except for UNC, who they face twice. The loaded non-conference schedule, the fact that this conference is super loaded from top to bottom, and there's so many teams that can take you out. Duke is going to have a huge test, but it feels like they are ready for this challenge, and it feels like they're ready to make that leap into being, they're looking at these polls, they consider them one of the top 3 teams in the ACC, in a loaded ACC. They have a chance to go for some of these teams, beating a Notre Dame, beating NC State. They beat Ohio State on the road in the NCAA tournament last year as a 7th seed. So these are some teams that are loaded and ready to go, but Duke is going to be right there. So as we focus on the men for the most part during this season, also keep in mind that the women are out there getting their just due, and you should keep in touch with them too. Their first game is on November 4th in Cameron, the same the same day as Duke takes on Maine. I think their game is at like lunchtime, and then Duke men are in the evening. But keep locked in on them, because number 11, this team is poised to be one of the teams to watch out for when it comes down to who can make it to the Final Four this year. Duke's name is going to be right there with him. Kerr Lawson has this team ready.
Yeah, I'll tell you the thing that I noticed was I pay attention to the ACC teams, and the fact that Notre Dame's 6, NC State's 9, and then Duke at 11. North Carolina 15. You already mentioned all of them. Louisville 17, blah blah blah. Florida State 19. But I just noticed that they're projecting Duke to be the number 3 team in the ACC, and really quite easily within striking distance of Notre Dame and NC State. That's not a big gap between those teams by any stretch of the imagination. So yeah, there's a real chance that Coach Kara is going to have a very, very special team this year. I saw them practice when I was in Durham. They look experienced and they look really talented. I mean, I'm not as good at judging women's basketball as I am at judging men's. I just haven't watched nearly as much of it. But I saw a team that was especially the starters. I didn't really talk about this when we had our podcast about the practice that I saw. Man, the Duke starters for the women's team seem to be really, really good. They scrimmage
Mhm.
against a bunch of high school, a former like high school boys players. And I noticed when the boys were playing against the second team, they did fairly well. The boys, they were primarily doing defensive drills, but the boys were able to get where they needed to be, and they got pretty good shots. When they played against the Duke starters, and these guys are pretty good players. They played against the Duke starters. They could do nothing. It was striking how many times it was like a steal or a block shot or just like total scrambling, like, oh my God, someone's taking the ball away from me. I thought the quality of the defense that I saw from the Duke women was really impressive. And I'm looking forward to seeing them. Look, Kara's teams have been good defensive teams for the past several years. I guess, the key for them is can they score a little bit? But what I saw in practice, it looked like they're super fierce on defense.
Yeah, and I will say you made a good point when you went to the practice. You were able to see that they're playing some guys players. I will point out just to clarify for people out there, like that's what women's teams do. They bring in a bunch
Oh, it's
of
very common. Yeah. Yeah.
it's very common that teams will bring in, and they usually go to school at Duke, right? So or at the school. So what they
Yeah.
do,
Yeah. No, I didn't mean to imply they're current high school players. They're former high school players who are
yeah,
Duke students. In fact, I
yeah,
was
yeah,
sitting next to a guy at Countdown, really quick, at Countdown to Craziness. I was sitting next to a guy whose son was the leading scorer for the guys scrimmaging against the Duke women. He was having a great time watching his son playing Cameron, which is something I think he'd never dreamed he'd be able to do.
yeah. One of my former roommates in college was one of the practice players on the team, and I will say that this is the reason why teams get good. This is why some of the teams are elite. Is they have an elite practice player squad of guys who are testing them every single moment. The one thing about South Carolina, when they won the national championship, Don Staley said, "No, my practice players get rings too because they're the reason why we get to be as good as we are because we are practicing against them every day." Just like on the men's side, Spencer Hubbard getting improving, getting better, Stanley Borton getting better, that lifts up the rest of the team because they're playing decent competition and good competition in practice. You want your practice to be harder than the game. That means everyone's getting better in practice, and to do that, sometimes on the women's side they bring in men's practice players, and it really really helps out. They've been doing it at Duke for a while, and I think when it comes to Kara Lawson, she's going to have this team ready to play, to be physical. The one thing that's going to be their Achilles heel is health. That has been what's kind of happened in the last couple of years with the number of injuries that they've had. But if they can keep everybody healthy, I promise you, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be a special run by Our Lady Blue Devils.
Yeah. By the way, Donald, when I was in school, uh, it was nothing official, but I used to play against the Duke women's basketball team all the time. Like in the off season and even during the regular season, we would just scrimmage against them, me and some of my buddies. This is just, we did this fairly often. They would crush us. They
Oh
were
yeah,
so
I will say there are three women's players with their numbers in the rafters in Cameron, and two of them have crossed me up big time, and I'm proud to say that because they're real. I mean, they're real legit ballers there, and basketball translates. It does not matter who's the one with the ball. If you're good at ball, the ball talks and the ball speaks. So I'm really looking forward to this season.
Yeah, back in my day, there was a player, Katie Meyer, who is now, I believe, the coach at Miami. She's been the coach at
Yep.
Miami for a while.
Yep, she was at
Uh,
she was at Duke for a little bit as an
yeah,
assistant, and then went to Miami. She was at Miami when I was there.
yeah. So yeah, Katie's been there for a long time, I think. I knew Katie really, really well. We would play basketball, and back then, I always would say that the women don't sort of play as physically as the men do, or as quick and as such. They were more skilled, but Katie played like I used to say Katie played like a guy. And it was, you couldn't stay in front of her, and she would swoop in, block shot. It was fun, although we were not much competition for them. All right,
Yeah.
before we go, as I believe me, I was just taking a little trip down memory lane there. Sue Hartnett, Lee Morgan. I'm remembering a bunch of names of friends of mine that I haven't seen in a long time. Oh my God. Okay. In any event, before we go, we have to talk about what's coming up on Saturday. The Blue Devils will be playing Lincoln, PA in an exhibition game, Division II team. We'll be previewing that in a couple days on the podcast. Look for that. We're going to preview them. But the big thing that's happening that day, the most important thing happening that day, is that after the game is over, approximately an hour after the exhibition is done, at 4 p.m. Eastern time, we will open up a Zoom room and Donald and I will do a live DBR podcast with all of you. We want you to join in, and the way you do it is super simple. I've made a tiny URL for you. It's a Zoom room, so all you need to remember is this: tiny URL / DBR Zoom, and capitalize the D, the B, the R, and the Z. tinyurl.com / DBR Zoom. This is all set up. It is going to be a ton of fun. We're going to be calling you guys in. And Don, I'll tell you one thing I want to do right now, right away. I want headlines. I want people to come to that Zoom with headlines ready. You will raise your hand. We will unmute you and you will be able to speak up and do your headline out loud. There won't be us butchering it or anything like that. It'll be you doing your headline exactly as you want based on the game that we saw earlier that day.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. Wear your Duke blue, as I mentioned. Make sure you don't, if you have a background, we're going to see you. It won't be, we're talking about recording the video aspect of things and how we package that up. But for the most part, just make sure that your cat's not, hacking up along or something behind you. But other than that, and again, be respectful. We said that in the last show. We'll say it again. Be respectful. We don't think there's going to be any issues with that. But, just want to put that out there. But it's going to be a lot of fun. Again, bring your headlines, bring your questions. We obviously love questions, things that you saw during the game. And if you were at the game, if you're doing it from Cameron or just after you get home from Cameron, bring that perspective as well, because obviously Jason and I are not going to be at the game. And so we want to see what it's like or hear what it's like at the game. Come one, come all. If you're one of the current students, current line monitors, holler, use the link. But we're really looking forward to seeing everybody on there.
Yeah, and if it works out well, if this is something that works, then we'll try and do it for a regular season game at some point. Could be a lot of fun. We love engaging with all of you. And this is, the ultimate engagement, having you all on a podcast with us. Don't forget, if you have a question, if you have an email, if you have a comment, if you have a headline, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. That is how you reach us. Once again, the URL for our Saturday afternoon, 4 p.m. Eastern time group Zoom will be tinyurl.com / DBR Zoom. Looking forward to seeing all of you there. Until then, actually not until then, because we'll be back in your feed, like I said, with a preview of Florida State and Lincoln. Got football and basketball to preview for you in the next 24, 36 hours, something like that. But until then, I'm Donald. No, I'm not. I'm Jason. I looked at you and I read your name instead of saying my own name.
You and
what
your
is wrong
names
with me
this last week? Come on now.
Oh my God. I'm Jason. He's Donald. This is the Duke Band to play us out and take us home.
I'm Ron Bergen.